Don't you dare move, or we both die. Amara Jones's voice cracked, raw and thin, as she knelt in the rain-soaked filth of the alley. Her hands trembled violently, but they clutched a sleeve of Italian silk so fine it felt like water, fabric that cost more than her entire college tuition and the 2 jobs she worked to pay for it. The man collapsed against the slick brick wall wasn't just injured, he was a mountain of power brought down by a sudden, violent avalanche. He was covered in blood, his breathing shallow and wet, but his eyes, cold, dark, and terrifyingly calm amidst the chaos, held a primordial power that screamed he was infinitely more dangerous than the men currently hunting him. Amara was just a night shift waitress trying to survive a double shift, her mind bleary with calculus formulas and coffee-stained order pads. But in that heartbeat, as the neon sign from Joe's Eats flickered crimson across his pale face, she realized with a chilling certainty, she hadn't just found a victim. She had found a mafia boss. And in touching him, in choosing to help, she had just made the most dangerous mistake of her life. Stay with me until the end, because the secret Amara discovers about this man will not only shatter her world but change the fate of this entire city forever. The scent of stale fryer oil and cheap, pine-scented disinfectant was the perfume of Amara's existence. At 22, her life was a meticulously calculated cycle of exhaustion. Finance student by day at City College, graveyard shift waitress by night at Joe's Eats. Her world was a spreadsheet of minutes and dollars, each one accounted for, each one a brick in the fragile bridge she was building away from this neighborhood. The rain that night didn't just fall, it hammered against the pavement of the back alley with a rhythmic, suffocating persistence, as if trying to beat the city into submission. 3 a.m. The witching hour at Joe's. The clientele shifted from late-night couples to the city's shadows, truckers with 1,000-yard stares, insomniac cabbies, and men who carried the cold weight of the night in their posture. Amara refilled a coffee cup for a regular known only as Sully, her movements automatic, her mind replaying a lecture on risk-weighted assets. Her body ached, a deep bone weariness that sleep never quite cured. At 3:12 a.m., the rhythm of the rain was shattered. Not by a shout, but by the heavy, frantic thud of dress shoes on wet asphalt, a sprint, followed by a sickening, wet slide of a body impacting brick. Then, silence, deeper than before. Her waitress instincts, honed by a lifetime of reading tense rooms and de-escalating drunk patrons, flared. This wasn't a drunk falling. This was something else. Against every ounce of better judgment screaming in her head, she pushed through the smudged back door, the damp chill hitting her like a slap. The alley was a canyon of neglect between Joe's and a shuttered textile warehouse. The neon light from the diner's sign cast a garish, pulsing red glow across the wet asphalt, turning puddles into pools of blood. There, collapsed against a stack of rusted milk crates, was a man who looked like he had been teleported from another universe and dropped into this gutter. He wore a charcoal gray suit that even in its ruined state spoke of obscene money, the kind of tailoring that shaped the body, not just covered it. But the left side was soaked through, a deep, spreading crimson that blackened the expensive wool. One hand was clamped over his ribs, long fingers stained dark. Her breath hitched. Walk away, her survival instinct pleaded. Call 911 from inside. Don't get involved. But her feet carried her forward. The city had a way of grinding people into the pavement and forgetting them. She knew that better than anyone. As she knelt, the filthy water seeping through the knees of her uniform pants, her own hands shaking from cold and fear, she reached for him. "Sir? Can you hear me?" His head lolled, then lifted. And she saw his eyes. They weren't glazed with pain or wide with fear. They were sharp, focused, and held a terrifying, controlled rage. They were the eyes of a man who was assessing a threat, calculating odds, even as his life pooled around him. In that single, frozen moment, under the hellish red neon, Amara's spreadsheet mind did a brutal recalculation. The expensive suit, the lethal calm, the violence that had sought him out. This wasn't a random mugging. She hadn't just found a man bleeding. She had found a predator. And kneeling there in the rain, she was no longer a potential savior. She was a variable in his equation. Her next decision, in the next 5 seconds, would either save her life or end it. Damon Valerius watched the girl through a narrowing tunnel of consciousness. The pain was a distant, fiery throb, compartmentalized behind decades of discipline. Even through the haze of blood loss, his mind functioned with a cold, surgical precision. He saw the cheap, stained apron, the exhaustion etched under her wide eyes, the way her knuckles were white where she gripped his sleeve. He catalogued her, young, black, poor, terrified. A non-entity. A ghost in the city's machinery. To him, sentiment was an exploitable weakness, and weakness got you killed. He had spent 30 years building impenetrable walls around his heart, fortifying them with every betrayal, every loss. "You should go," he rasped. The voice that usually commanded rooms and settled disputes was a raw scrape, but the authority in it was undiminished. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order from a king who'd fallen from his throne. Amara flinched but didn't release his arm. The sound of his voice, that undercurrent of absolute power, confirmed her dread. This was no ordinary man. "If I go, you bleed out in 10 minutes, she replied, her own voice finding a surprising, sharp clarity over the drumming rain. It was the voice she used with chefs who tried to short her orders. It was survival voice. She ignored the alley filth soaking into her uniform, her eyes scanning the wound. The bullet, she thought, had gone through the fleshy part of his side. A miracle, but he was losing too much blood, too fast. Her gaze flickered to his wrist, where a gold Patek Philippe peeked from beneath his cuff. A watch worth more than a house. It wasn't just a timepiece. It was a marker, a symbol of the unspoken rules that governed a world she'd only heard whispers about. The world that happened after Joe's locked its doors. Suddenly, the relative quiet was torn by the roar of a high-performance engine, gunning hard on the street just beyond the alley's mouth. Tires squealed. The men hunting him were close, circling like sharks sensing blood in the water. Panic, pure and electric, shot through Amara. The police were minutes away, at best. And what would they see? A black girl in a waitress uniform over a dying white man in a suit that screamed crime. Her mind, trained for risk assessment, presented a brutal flowchart of probable outcomes, none of them good for her. Instinct took over. She couldn't leave him to die. And she couldn't stay here. "Upstairs," she commanded, the word leaving her lips before she could reconsider. She hooked his good arm over her slender shoulders, bracing her legs. He was solid muscle, a dead weight of pure will. My apartment. Now. Unless you want them to finish the job. For a second, he resisted, his pride a tangible force. Then, with a grunt of agony, he leveraged his weight against her, and they stumbled toward the rusted fire escape at the back of Joe's. Her apartment was a single room above the diner, a space that held the perpetual ghost of fried food and damp plaster. It was clean but shabby, a thrift store couch, a laminate table buried under finance textbooks, a single window looking onto the brick wall of the next building. She half-dragged, half-guided him to the couch, the scent of rain, copper, and his expensive, sandalwood cologne now overpowering the smell of home. Lie back, she said, already moving to the tiny bathroom for the first aid kit she kept for burns and cuts from the diner. When she returned, he was watching her, his head propped against the armrest, his face pale as marble but his eyes still tracking her every move. He was a wolf in a trap, assessing the handler. Why, he managed to ask again, the single word loaded with a lifetime of cynical disbelief. Amara didn't answer immediately. She cut away the ruined, blood-soaked silk of his shirt with kitchen shears, her hands steadying as she focused on the task. The wound was clean, a through and through, but ugly. She pressed clean towels against it, applying pressure. As she worked, her fingers brushed against something hard and cold tucked into a hidden vest pocket beneath his shirt. A small, tarnished silver locket, cold against her skin. He stiffened almost imperceptibly, a reaction more telling than a shout. She ignored it, focusing on the wound. Because, she said finally, not looking up, her voice quiet but firm, someone once told me that the smallest hands, the ones everyone overlooks, sometimes carry the greatest power to tip the scales. She taped the bandage in place, her work efficient if not surgical. Tonight, mister, these waitress hands are all you've got. A flicker of something, not warmth, but recognition, passed through his dark eyes. He looked away, toward the window and the relentless rain. For 3 decades, he had convinced himself that caring was a luxury he couldn't afford, a flaw that got people like his younger brother, Marco, killed on these very streets. Marco, who'd had a smile that could disarm anyone, who'd believed in fairness. Marco, whose loss had extinguished the last soft light in Damon and forged the icy dawn he had become. The locket contained a faded picture of them both, a ghost he carried as a reminder and a punishment. This girl, with her textbook principles and her stubborn, ill-advised mercy, was a splash of color on the gray canvas of his existence. It was unnerving. The fragile quiet of the apartment lasted 27 minutes. Amara was cleaning her hands at the sink when the silence was shattered by a heavy, deliberate thud from the hallway directly below, the back entrance to Joe's. Then another. Not a knock. An impact. She froze, the water running over her fingers turning cold. Damon was on his feet in an instant, pain forgotten, his body coiled with a lethal tension that transformed him from a patient back into a predator. He moved to the side of the window, peering through a sliver of curtain into the alley below. "They're here," he said, his voice low and flat. Through the thin floorboards, they heard the splintering crack of wood, the diner's back door giving way. Muffled voices, harsh and guttural, floated up. They were searching the diner. It wouldn't take them long to check the apartment. Amara's mind raced. She was a finance student. She modeled outcomes. The probability of two armed men overlooking the obvious residence of the diner's employee was near zero. The probability of them being merciful was absolute zero. "Stay quiet," she breathed, her face pale but set. She had one advantage: she was exactly who she appeared to be. A nobody. She had to play the part perfectly. She quickly grabbed her finance textbooks and spread them open on the table, scattering highlighters and pens. She pointed Damon toward the small closet, the only hiding place. For a heartbeat, he didn't move, his eyes locked on hers. It was a silent, profound transaction. In that look was a mafia boss's ultimatum: protect me now, and you place yourself under my protection forever. Fail, and there will be no consequences for you to worry about, because you'll be dead. He slipped into the darkness of the closet, leaving the door slightly ajar. The pounding started on her door a minute later. It wasn't a request for entry, it was an announcement of violation. Amara took a deep breath, smoothed her apron, and opened the door just enough to look out, blocking the view with her body. A man filled the doorway. He was built like a bulldozer in an ill-fitting leather jacket, with a neck thicker than his head and knuckles scarred from a lifetime of violence. This was Silas, Lee O'Rourke's most feared enforcer, nicknamed the Slammer for his preferred method of interrogation. "We're looking for someone," Silas grunted, his eyes like chips of flint as he tried to peer past her. "It's 3:30 in the morning," Amara said, layering her voice with sleepiness and annoyance. "I have a midterm at 8. What do you want?" "A man. Shot. He might have come this way." Silas's gaze swept over her, dismissing her as insignificant. He pushed past her, his bulk forcing the door wide open. The apartment was laid bare. The couch with its faded cover, the bandage wrappers and bloody towels Amara hadn't yet had time to hide in the sink, the table with its textbooks. Silas's eyes lingered on the towels. "Cut myself on a broken glass at work," Amara said quickly, crossing her arms. It was a mess. Silas wasn't listening. He was staring at the closet door. He took a step toward it. Amara's heart hammered against her ribs. Every cell in her body screamed to run. But running meant death. She saw the handle of a knife tucked into Silas's belt. From the darkness of the closet, Damon watched through the crack. His hand was wrapped around the hilt of a stiletto blade he'd drawn from a sheath strapped to his calf, a tool Amara never knew he had. His breathing was silent. He was calculating the angle, the force needed to drive the blade up through the jaw and into the brain if Silas opened that door. He was also calculating the girl's odds if he did. They were poor. Silas's hand reached for the closet knob. "The diner's cash box is in there." Amara's voice cut through the tension, sharp and clear. It was a desperate, crazy lie. Silas paused, his hand hovering. He turned his head slowly, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Is it now? Joe makes me lock it up here after close. Says the safe is too obvious." She forced a shrug, trying to look like a petty thief caught in a minor act. "You gonna tell him? Or are we negotiating?" It was a masterstroke. It appealed to Silas's greed and his low opinion of her. A waitress skimming from the till was infinitely more believable than a waitress harboring a mafia kingpin. Silas snorted, a sound of contempt. He took his hand off the knob and took a step toward her, looming. "How much?" 200, maybe 250, she said, her voice smaller now, playing the scared girl. He sneered, the thrill of the hunt momentarily diverted by the prospect of easy money. He looked around once more, but the closet no longer held his interest. The bleeding man wasn't hiding behind a waitress's stolen tips. "Keep it," he finally grunted, turning back to the door. "You're gonna need it for your dental bill if you lie to me again, sweetheart." He gave her one last, dismissive look and left, his heavy footsteps thudding down the stairs. Amara stood frozen until she heard the alley door slam shut. Then her legs gave way, and she sank onto the couch, trembling violently. The closet door opened. Damon Valerius stepped out. He didn't look relieved. He looked at her with a new, intense focus. The blade had vanished. He moved to the window, watching until a black SUV pulled away from the curb below. He turned back to her. The casual power in his stance was overwhelming. The man bleeding in the alley was gone, erased. "You have courage, Amara Jones," he said, her name sounding foreign and deliberate on his tongue. He must have seen it on her name tag, or deduced it. A man like him knew how to find things out. But courage in this city, when you have no power, is just a slower way to die. It gets people buried in foundations. He took a slow, deliberate step toward the center of her small room, as if claiming it. "My men will be here soon. You are safe now." "Who are you?" she whispered, the question she'd been afraid to ask finally breaking free. He held her gaze, the last of his civilian disguise falling away. "My name is Damon Valerius." The name meant nothing to her at first. Then it clicked, connecting to fragments of news reports, to the hushed, fearful conversations of the late-night diners who dealt in cash and threats. Damon Valerius. The phantom of the waterfront. The man who owned the docks, the warehouses, the politicians. The man the police tiptoed around, the man whose name was spoken in whispers. Not a street thug like Rourke. A CEO of crime. An emperor. The blood drained from her face completely. She hadn't saved a wounded man. She had brought a sleeping dragon into her home. Damon's men arrived within 15 minutes, 3 of them, dressed in dark, expensive casual wear, moving with a quiet, lethal efficiency. They brought a medical kit far more sophisticated than hers and a change of clothes. They treated Damon with a deference that bordered on reverence, speaking in low tones. They called him Sir or Don Valerio, the latter a title that spoke of old-world roots. One of them, a sharp-faced man introduced as Carlo, assessed Amara with cold, analytical eyes. "The girl is a liability, sir. We should relocate you immediately." Damon, sitting upright as his wound was professionally dressed, didn't look at Carlo. He looked at Amara, who stood by her sink, arms wrapped around herself. "She is not a liability. She is under my protection. See that her routine is undisturbed. And find out everything about Leo Rourke's movements. I want to know who he's bought, who he's scared, and where he sleeps. He was giving orders again, the world bending back to his will. For the next 3 days, Amara's apartment became a clandestine command center. She went to her classes and her shifts, moving through her life like a ghost. But now, she was listening with new ears. At Joe's, Rourke's men, emboldened by their near-miss with Valerius, talked freely in their booth. They bragged about shaking down new businesses on the south side, about a shipment coming in Thursday night, about how the old man Valerio was finally finished. Amara, refilling their coffee, her face a mask of vacant politeness, absorbed every word. She noted names, times, addresses. She became Damon's eyes and ears on a world he couldn't currently walk, a silent intelligence asset in a blue uniform. At night, she'd return and relay the information. Damon would listen, his expression inscrutable, then issue soft-spoken commands to Carlo via a secure phone. During the days, as he regained his strength with frightening speed, he watched her. He saw the fierce concentration with which she tackled her textbooks, the stubborn set of her jaw when she was tired, the innate dignity she carried despite her circumstances. He saw that she asked for nothing. Not money, not favors. Once, he found her crying silently at the table, a disconnection notice for her mother's medical insurance clutched in her hand. She hadn't made a sound. Something long dormant stirred in Damon Valerius. It wasn't affection, he was incapable of that as he understood it. It was a profound, unsettling recognition. Here was a strength not born of violence or fear, but of resilience. A refusal to break. For 30 years, he'd fought for territory, for money, for respect. Now, holed up in this shabby apartment, he realized with a shock that he wasn't just fighting for his empire anymore. He was fighting for the safety of the one person who had looked at the bleeding man in the alley, not the monster the city feared. On the 4th day, Damon declared, "It's time." He stood in the center of the room, wearing a simple black sweater and trousers Carlo had brought. They were humble clothes, but on him, they looked like a uniform. The bandages were still on, but he moved without a hint of impediment. The mountain had reformed. He took the burner phone Amara used. He didn't dial a number from memory, he inputted a long, complex code. The call connected. "This is Valerio," he said, his voice not loud, but filling the small room with its absolute gravity. Code black. Execute contingency maestro. All assets. I want Rourke's financials frozen by midnight. I want his captains offered the choice of allegiance or oblivion. I want the precinct captains who are on his payroll in my office by 10 a.m. tomorrow, or their replacements will be. The shipment at the Southside dock tonight? Intercept it. Donate the contents to the city shelter on 5th Street. Let it be known who provided it. He listened for a moment, his eyes cold. No. He doesn't get a bullet. He gets a lesson. He hung up. The city's underworld had just shifted on its axis with a single, calm conversation. Amara understood in that moment the true nature of power. It wasn't the man with the gun in the alley. It was the man who could, from a waitress's apartment, orchestrate the ruin of another man's life with a phone call. Damon looked at her. "You have a midterm tomorrow?" She nodded, stunned. Go to sleep. The noise will be over by morning. The noise was a silent, citywide earthquake. Amara heard about it in fragments. Rourke's primary holding company was mysteriously audited and frozen. 3 of his key lieutenants were found that morning, unharmed but resigned, having switched their allegiance. The lucrative shipment of illicit goods vanished, only to reappear as a charitable donation, with subtle but undeniable Valerius fingerprints all over it. The confrontation, when it came, wasn't in a dramatic shootout. It was in a cold, empty warehouse Rourke had thought was secure. Damon walked in, alone, with only Carlo shadowing him. Amara, against all orders, had followed at a distance, hidden in the shadows of a catwalk above. She had to see. Leo Rourke, a bloated, vicious man with a face like a clenched fist, was surrounded by empty space. His men were gone. His money was gone. He was a king without a kingdom, standing in the dark. Valerio, he spat, his voice echoing in the vast space. Leo, Damon said, his tone conversational. You tried to have me killed over a few blocks of slums you were too stupid to run properly. It's business. Rourke shouted, desperation seeping in. No, Damon corrected, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. What you did to the families on those blocks, the protection rackets, the poison you pushed in their schools, that was butchery. Not business. He stepped closer. You also sent a man to a young woman's home. You frightened her. Rourke scoffed. The waitress? She's nothing. In the shadows, Amara's breath caught. Damon's movement was too fast to follow. One moment he was standing still, the next, Rourke was on his knees, Damon's hand twisted in his hair, forcing his head back. Look at me, Damon hissed, the controlled rage finally surfacing, icy and terrible. You thought she was a waitress. A nobody. To me, she is the reason you are still breathing. She is the one who, with her nothing hands, saved the man who is now going to dismantle your life brick by brick. He released him with a shove. You don't get to die. You get to be poor. You get to be powerless. You get to live in the world you created for others. Every business you shook down, every person you hurt, will know you are now fair game. The territory you took from me? I'm giving it to the community board. The protection money you collected will now be a community fund, administered by people you terrorized. It was a punishment far worse than death for a man like Rourke. It was total erasure. It was justice served not by the courts, but by a darker, more poetic hand. As Damon turned to leave, he looked up, his eyes finding Amara in the darkness of the catwalk. He had known she was there all along. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. 6 months later, the chill of autumn was in the air. Amara sat not at her rickety kitchen table, but in a sleek, ergonomic chair in a quiet office downtown. A paid internship at a top financial firm, arranged by a mysterious benefactor. Her tuition at City College was paid in full, anonymous trust covering the balance. Her mother was in a beautiful, safe assisted living facility with round-the-clock care, her medical bills a forgotten worry. Amara never saw Damon Valerius in the light of day. She didn't need to. She felt his presence in the architecture of her new safety. A sleek, black sedan would sit at the far corner of her street every night, a silent guardian. On her first day at the internship, a single, perfect white orchid appeared on her desk with a note in elegant, anonymous script, for courage. Every Tuesday, like clockwork, a bouquet of fresh flowers would be delivered to her apartment. Never roses. Always something interesting: birds of paradise, blue hydrangeas, calla lilies. The city's whispers had woven a new legend: the night the Ice King, Damon Valerius, was wounded and saved by an angel, and how his heart, long frozen, had thawed just enough to burn his enemies to ash. But Amara knew the truth was more complex, more human. She hadn't saved a monster. She had simply shown a man who had forgotten his own humanity, a man haunted by the ghost of a brother who believed in good, that it still existed. In her stubborn, principled, ill-advised act of mercy, she had reminded Damon Valerius of the man he might have been, and in doing so, had changed the man he was. She closed her finance textbook, a smile touching her lips as she looked out at the city skyline. The lecture from her first economics professor echoed in her mind: true power isn't just about accumulation, it's about leverage. The application of force at the right point can move the world. Sometimes, the professor had mused, the smallest hands, the ones everyone overlooks, hold the greatest leverage of all. Amara Jones, former night shift waitress, finally understood. She had been that leverage. And in saving a mafia boss, she had not just changed his fate, or secured her own. She had, in her own quiet way, tipped the scales for an entire city.